in April 12, we went past a historic point where dumb phones and smartphones crossed paths. So now you have much more smartphones than dumb phones. And that's true across the world. No matter where you look, you're seeing this penetration. With the iPhone, etc., you'll find that that is increasingly more so the case. Next slide, please. And as a result of this, something new is happening. There is this thing called the app economy. No matter what you think of, there's an app for that, right? Just look for it and you'll find an app for that. I was recently transiting through Heathrow, and I was in an absolute panic. I had 40 minutes. I had to change my terminal. I knew that for a fact. I knew that the next airline would not wait for me, but it was critical that I make that connection. So I told the person who was serving us drinks on board the flight, I said, I'm really concerned. What can you do to help me? And she said, do you have the internet? I said, of course. It's British. It's Virgin Atlantic. Of course I have the internet. She said, great. Download the Heathrow app. I said, the what? She said, the Heathrow app. Just download it. So I did. And the Heathrow app told me in real time what was going on. Fortunately for me, the other flight had been delayed by 20 minutes. So I had an hour instead of 40 minutes, and I had time to spare by the time I got around to where I needed to. But you're seeing here that there are sales and production in the region. What's important to notice here is that Asia Pacific is producing more apps than consuming them for the benefit of the rest of the world. And that in a region that still does not have the internet. Think about that, right? As the internet penetrates deeper and smartphones become ubiquitous, you will find that that part of the economy is going to take off. They've got the population, they've got the brain's trust, they know what to do when they have access to these computing devices. Next slide, please. So people ask me, is it the iPhone that we should be working with? Not really, it varies from time to time. But if you look at this graph, it tells you if you're betting on the Android, you're probably in a good place. Next slide. While all this is going on in the biology labs, there's something else going on. This is the cost per raw megabase of DNA sequencing. About 20 years ago, under President Clinton, there was a move to decode the human genome. It was called the Human Genome Project. 2 different institutions were concurrently asked to do this decoding. One, a government institution, and the second, a private enterprise. They both won. How did they both win? Well, they declared that they had decoded the human genome on the same day. That was the extent of winning. In reality, neither of them had decoded more than 10% of the human genome on that day. Very historic day. But Craig Venter, who was the private guy, and Francis Collins, who was the government guy, were both on the podium with President Clinton when they made the announcement that the human genome had been decoded. Indeed, they had decoded it. Why? Because the uniqueness of the human genome, as compared with anything that's a close resemblance to it, is only about 3%. So by decoding 10%, they had gone way past the point of determining what was uniquely human about the genome. The cost of doing that was enormous. It was an unimaginable $100 million to decode that one genome. Guess what? You can do it for $1,000 today. And within the next 3 years, you'll be able to do it for $10. You'll be able to walk into your doctor's office, give a little pinprick sample of your blood, or take a swab and give a saliva sample, and get a complete decoding of your human genome. You can do that today by going to companies like 23andMe, for instance. But the problem is this: that data is so vital for you and so critically important that you shield from a privacy viewpoint that it's one of the most scary things that you're likely to do. Imagine if all your biomarkers show that you're liable to get this, this, and this condition, and your insurance company got a hold of that. Ooh, that's a problem, eh? Next slide, please.
Excuse me.
So I have a question here,
Yep.
if I can interrupt.
So when you said that you could decode what, let's say, what diseases I'm prone to, what about when you have a disease, can the same process figure out which medicine might be helpful to treat that disease?
Perfect. It's a layup for my next slide. Thank you for asking. So what else is happening? Well, there's a lot happening in the traditional field here. Generics are eating up the traditional field. Generics are literally eating up the traditional field, where there was patent protection for the big pharma guys. The big pharma companies are going through all kinds of gyrations. This is annual sale of drugs losing patent protection in 2014. And this is, the numbers are in the billions of dollars. So you look at Sanofi, their Lantus, Ranagel, and what the heck is that? Moltag, I remember that now. Between those three, it's $8 billion in revenues that they're losing. And it just goes on and on and on and on. Levin, Rituxan, Nexium, Cymbalta. All these are all the kind of drugs that they will advertise the heck out of on TV. Why? Because they want to keep this going as long as they possibly can. When they fall off the IP spectrum for them, it's zero sales, because on the next day, the generic guys will introduce their generic equivalents. And it's game over for the branded boys. So this is what's going on in the background. Next slide, please. In the meantime, the regulatory environment, particularly in the US, is incredibly tight. The FDA is adding more agents to it literally every day. So getting a new drug out used to be a 7-year process. It's now a 10-year process. Used to cost $1 billion. It costs about $2.1 billion. Imagine, you got to invest $2.1 billion. You've got a patent lifetime of 17 years, 10 of which is gone by the time you get the first dollar. And then you're taking a chance to see whether you're going to get anything back or not, because you've already invested $2.1 billion. You got to make sales enough to offset that $2.1 billion. It's an amazing problem. Next slide, please. So what's happening? Precisely what Ashima asked. People are starting to exchange my money for my drug. And it's at the bleeding edge of research as we speak. And this is happening on a global basis. What you see on the left side is healthcare spending. People are investing billions of dollars across the spectrum trying to figure out how to have a better quality of health. And it doesn't matter which region of the world we're talking about. Even in China, people are doing this. China is one of the worst self-health conscious nations in the world. Even there, they're doing it. What are they also doing? They're also investing very heavily in devices. Not just in traditional medicines, which are pharmaceuticals, chemical-based, but devices are physical. They're investing in devices, saying, how can I keep myself healthier, longer, and have a better quality of life? You asked about, can we decode it backwards? Exactly, that's exactly what's happening now. More and more, you can go in and get a tissue extracted for a sample, which gets sequenced and matched against a reference to figure out what's really happening and come back with a formulation that is relatively unique. Now, if you're a billionaire, you can do this. If you recall, Steve Jobs, when he was diagnosed, did precisely this. People told him, look, the particular condition that you have is incurable. Are you sure that you can do anything about it? He said, well, we're going to give it a best shot, right? It was extended for a period of time until the disease condition just overtook whatever it is that he was capable of getting done. In Los Angeles, with the UCLA health system, there is a doctor who does exactly this for his wealthier patients, because this is bleeding edge research. The products are very expensive, but it works. When it works, it's outside of the FDA realm. There is no liability consequence, so you're taking it at your own risk, but then you've also been diagnosed with something that's severe. So it's a trade-off that you go through as a result. Next slide, please. The other thing that's happening is wireless health, which is a series of devices that are being innovated across the spectrum. So you could literally be like the $1 Million Man and wear a bunch of gadgets that talk to your cell phone as the gateway, which in turn gets connected to the global internet, and you can get all kinds of readings back. Now, the simplest of these is the bands that you see people wear today. A wellness band that talks to their cell phone. Nike has embedded their actuators to their shoes, into their shoes, so that the shoe is talking to your cell phone. I've got one of those applications, so every morning when I go out for a walk, it tells me a number of steps that I took, and was my gait all right or not, did it match with yesterday's, or am I beginning to stumble, or all kinds of stuff. You know, these things are so subtle that you don't notice them. Half the time, disease conditions don't just happen overnight. They creep up on you and you don't notice. They tell you that blood pressure, for instance, is the silent killer. You never know that you have blood pressure until you go in for a health check and the guy says you've got blood pressure. So, well, what do you mean? I feel fine. Yeah, exactly, but you've got blood pressure, right? It's those kind of things. So this health thing is a very analog kind of thing happening in an increasingly digital world. How do we capture that divide and make it come together? This is what this kind of technology is starting to do. So, I want to end this with a show of hands. If you think back, I took you through about 20-25 slides of pictures, and as I said, they all tell a story. I could tell a story about every one of those pictures. But if you think back on those 20-25 slides, and you ask yourself, did I learn one thing today that I didn't know? Did you learn one thing that you didn't know? Show of hands, please. Thank you. So this is a quote. Get it again. By the chairman founder of the Other Club. Have you heard of the Other Club? I'll tell you a little story. There's a place in London called the Savoy. And when you go to the Savoy, you can ask for a particular room for a private dinner. And if you're willing to pay a big price, you can in fact get that room, which is where the Other Club still meets. It meets every 2 weeks, 26 times a year. It's convened by, typically, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the Treasury guy in the current reigning government. Hit it one more time. Winston Churchill was the founder